You know, there is a lot of oil in our country, a lot of natural gas. But this administration, for reasons best known to Barack Hussein Obama, doesn't want us to go for it. We're going to be talking today with someone who has spent a lot of time discussing this. In fact, they're going to sue, if they haven't already started, the Obama administration for rejecting a plan to get more oil to all of us. Stay tuned.
It's time for the Newsmaker Show on News Talk AM 1480 WLEA. Here's Kevin Torres.
We welcome to our program Dan Kish, who's the Vice President for Policy, Institute for Energy Research. Did I mistake anything there in my opening statement there, Dan? Is it true you're suing the administration?
It's actually the state of Alaska, Kevin, who's suing the federal government.
Because they know the oil is up there. Where do the two senators from Alaska, they're both Democrats, where do they stand?
Yeah, well, one of the senators is up for election this year, and he's doing his best to suggest that he supports drilling in Alaska, but it hasn't had much help from the Obama administration, which has basically watched oil production in Alaska decline, while in other places around the country where the government doesn't own all the land, as it does in Alaska, it's going up, like in North Dakota and Texas and other places. So this is a big issue for the state of Alaska, because at one time, back in 1989, the Alaska pipeline actually transported over 2 million barrels a day of oil to the west coast of Alaska, meaning we didn't have to import 2 million barrels a day. And that flow is now down to around 500,000 barrels. So the pipeline is about a quarter full. And people are worried that that pipeline will have to be shut down at some point in the very near future if we don't get more oil in it. And ANWR is the logical place because it's right next door to where all the oil is produced.
Okay, now Dan, listen, I'm going to give you a loaded question here, but really I think it does come down to this: either Obama and his fellow Democrats are so afraid of the environmentalists, or they just don't want us to be oil independent and to have plenty of oil and therefore plenty of gasoline. It can't be anything but one of those two things. What do you think?
Well, I've been watching energy politics in Washington for way too long, in my estimation. And in essence, I think it boils down to this. There are some people who see energy as a way to sort of control human behavior. It's the most important aspect of our economy because energy is capacity to do work, and it increases productivity, and we have enormous amounts of it. But we've lived now for decades with the central government telling us that we didn't have any more oil and we needed to switch to other forms like, the cylinders and the rest of the world. I think it largely comes down to control. They can't stand it when they're not in control of things, and clearly they're not in control of things. They can't stop what's happening in North Dakota. They can't stop what's happening in Texas. They can stop what's happening and the offshore of the United States, where 97% of the energy is unleased. And it doesn't fit their agenda which goes to green sources and taxes on energy and telling you what kind of car to drive and telling you what temperature to heat your house. And I really, truly, unfortunately, have come to that conclusion because there's no other explanation for it, because all the numbers show that we have tremendous supplies of energy and never should have been beholden to anyone if we wanted to allow our people to go get it. And what's happening in certain parts of the country right now where the government can't impede it tells us that we were right right about that, and that if they would get out of the way in other aspects, we could provide a lot of jobs, provide a lot of energy, and make our country stronger. And that just doesn't fit the agenda, Kevin.
Well, you know, Dan, where I live and also where this radio station is located, we have electric heat. I wouldn't recommend that to anyone because as they shut down the coal mines, the price of electricity just skyrockets. And you have to wonder, who are they? What team are these guys on? You're sort of explaining it. That way they control. But they're also going to drive a lot of people under in the process, aren't they?
Well, of course, and that's the downside of this and the immoral part about this, honestly. I mean, you're right. Coal and nuclear powers are our cheapest forms of energy for those plants that are already constructed, and the government, especially with regard to coal, has decided, and just to put it in perspective, we have more coal in the United States than the next 4 countries in the world in terms of supplies combined. China produces 4 times as much coal, burns 4 times as much coal as we do, and yet we have supplies that are larger as a percentage of the world's coal reserves than Saudi Arabia has of our oil reserves. And yet this, which should be considered a national asset, and if we, if there are things we need to do to clean it up, we can both do that and should do that, but the fact of the matter is we've already cleaned it up tremendously, and yet we're taking our largest, first in the world supplies and taking them off limits, and that means people are going to be relegated to paying higher bills. That makes them, maybe they can go and get money from the government. There's a program called Low-Income Heating Assistance, and it seems like the government is committed to the whole idea of putting more people on the dole, on being committed to them. So when it comes voting time, they remember who helped them out with their heating bill.
It's not a pretty picture, but I think it's an accurate one that you're portraying. I'm talking with Dan Kish, Vice President for the Institute for Energy Research, one of those horrible capitalists. Are you a capitalist, or you just speak for capilists?
Well, I believe in free markets.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah. What I do. I think that there are 320 million of us. We can all make decisions for ourselves. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. The good decisions tend to win out. When the government makes a bad, and when I make a bad decision, it's only me and those around me who get affected. When Washington makes a bad decision, 320 million people get it. Pow, right in the kisser.
Dan, I have long since lost faith in the two-party system. So we're going to take a break, and when I get back, let's see if you can restore some of that faith. What if, as should happen, given all the problems, the Democrats take back the Congress totally? Of course, they're still going to have to get the presidency. What happens if the Republicans, I should have said, if they get back the Congress and the presidency? Will change come? We'll be back with Dan Kish in just a moment. My guest is Dan Kish, Vice President of Policy for the Energy Research Organization, Institute for Energy Research. When Barack Obama took office, gasoline prices were, I don't know what, but now they've doubled. They've doubled. If the media wasn't so much in love with this guy, we'd be hearing that every single day. I mean, even when Clinton was president, and they liked Bill Clinton, when the gasoline prices went up, they hammered him. And, of course, if anything happened with George Bush, they hammered and hammered and hammered. But with this guy, they just are not going to say anything bad, even when his wife goes off on a several $million vacation to China and took with her 70, count them, actually 71 staff members. What in the world would they have to have 71 staff members for? But anyway, there she is off having a ball in China, and they both vacation regularly. Now, the reason I mention that is not that the president shouldn't have a vacation. But if you go back to the Depression, and a lot of people think we are in a depression, Franklin Roosevelt was very, very careful not to have any expensive vacations. He went fishing off the coast of Virginia once. They take a train, which was made just for him, back up to Hyde Park. This guy and his wife actually take jets to go to a play in New York. And yet we hear nothing about it. The media is totally silent. You know, that's one of the problems you folks have, Dan, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, certainly the media's treatment on many of these issues doesn't appear to be fair and balanced, and there is a cheering squad for a certain particular type of politics in Washington that I think ultimately threatens their protections under the Constitution. But that's a long story. Eventually, prostrating yourself before someone doesn't really induce respect, and I think we're seeing some of that now in terms of the way the White House treats the media.
Dan, this lawsuit, has it been filed against the Obama administration by Alaska?
It has. It has. It was filed a couple of weeks ago. What had happened is the state of Alaska, actually, they don't want to necessarily drill. All they've done is come up with a plan where they would put some money up and ask some companies to do the same, and they would go out and do exploratory work on the surface. In essence, they would go out on the frozen tundra of Anwar. I've been there well over a dozen times, and I can tell you it's at the end of the earth, and not like some of the groups who have used this as a fundraising tool have portrayed it. It's very desolate, and this area is expected, based on some 1980s work, to hold 10 billion barrels of oil, which, to put in perspective, is worth $1 trillion to our economy. Alaska would like the government to redo its to okay the ability for them to go out and discover how much oil might be under there and what contribution that might make to America, and they have said no. And so they've taken them to court based on their interpretation of the law, which appears to indicate that the federal government has to respond to requests from the state for this sort of non-invasive exploration.
Okay, let's go back to the question I posed before the break. If the Republicans get control, and all things being equal, they really should. The nation's in tough shape. Obamacare has turned a lot of people off. Price of everything has gone skyrocketing. So under normal circumstances, the Republicans should get back in power. Would that change anything, in your opinion, Dan?
Well, I'm afraid, Kevin, a lot of this is already baked in the cake. I mean, as the president has heard, and you've heard him say it, he has a pen and he has a phone. And on many of these issues, he's going to press, regardless of what the law says, to pursue his agenda. And therefore, for example, there's no laws that Congress needs to repeal or change or anything else with respect to him shutting down the coal industry. He's bound to do it, and he's using the Environmental Protection Agency as his shield on that. Things would get better because there might be some pushback that currently isn't happening. Typically what's happened is the House of Representatives, which is in Republican hands, passes bills to try to make energy, for example, they've passed umpteen bills on the Keystone Pipeline to make sure it gets built. The Senate, they die over in the Senate. Not all Republicans, I have to tell you, we're a nonpartisan group. There's a lot of Republicans that need to go to the woodshed for their policies with regard to energy, too, which are too often tied up in the Washington-based approach. We really need to put the power back out to the people in the United States.
Mm-hmm. But the people don't know. If they really don't know, either because they don't know, they just don't know, maybe they don't care, or they're being fed a lot of baloney. You got an uphill battle there, pal.
Yeah, no, it's a significant battle. I mean, when the media that most people see throughout the country or read or hear basically doesn't adequately reflect what's going on in terms of energy, and there's no mention of the fact that energy prices have doubled.
No, they never mentioned that at all. I mean, you know it, but they... Yeah.
Sure. And there's no talk about the fact that electricity prices are going up and up and up and up the more they do damage to it. And so these things aren't... there's an old saying that the media can't tell you what to think, but they can tell you what to think about. And what they tell you to think about is popular culture, if that's what you want to call it, and those sorts of things that sort of lead us astray when in reality the underpinnings of our economy, the foundation of economic growth in the United States, our energy, is under attack.
This is why I joined the Constitution Party, Dan. Because they believe in the Constitution. Republicans used to. In fact, there was a time when Democrats believed in it, but those days are long gone. Do you know, back in the Eisenhower administration, I was reading this, some years ago now, and Eisenhower, God rest his soul, had a stroke. And Nixon was the vice president, and they had to decide what to do. Poor Ike's in a hospital, I think in Kansas, somewhere like that. And who's in charge, and how do we make these decisions? Well, they had precedent for what happens when he dies, but they had no precedent for what happens if the guy's incapacitated, all right? I think they may have corrected that since then, but they didn't at that time. And so they looked around, get this now, they looked around the executive office building for a constitution, and they couldn't find one.
Oh, boy.
And that's before the internet, when they could have gone. And I've forgotten who it was, but one of the big shots said, it's going to be kind of awkward for one of us to go downtown and buy a constitution. Well, there you go. We really are in tough shape. And Dan, we'll follow this. Stay on the line for just a moment, will you?
I shall.
As I apologize for being late getting you on the air. Dan Kish, Institute for Energy Research. I assume you have a website, Dan?
We do, and the best way is energytownhall.org. EnergyTownhall.org. That's simple enough. Okay, thank you very much. Now, stay tuned for more news and information on AM 1480 WLEA. WLEA. WLEA.